In the untamed heart of Africa, where survival follows the harshest rules of nature, a scene unfolded that defied all logic. A group of wild lions stumbled upon a man, chained, helpless, left for dead. But what these apex predators did next wasn't an attack. It was something so extraordinary, so unbelievable, that it left everyone who heard the story utterly speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring and mind-blowing stories straight to you. The sun burned high above the Okavango Delta, its relentless heat shimmering across the dry, cracked earth. Birds circled lazily overhead, their cries lost in the oppressive stillness. Ethan Myers, a seasoned American wildlife ranger stationed in Botswana, had set out early that morning to patrol a known poaching hotspot. But somewhere along the isolated riverbanks, everything went terribly wrong. He never saw them coming. A group of poachers ambushed him. Desperate men who saw rangers as nothing more than obstacles. They disarmed him, bound his wrists with rusted chains, and fastened him to the thick trunk of a fever tree. "You'll be found, if the lions don't find you first," one of them sneered before disappearing into the brush. For hours, Ethan struggled against the chains, his wrists raw and bleeding. The blazing sun sapped his strength. His throat felt like sandpaper. And then, the worst happened. The tall grasses rustled nearby. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the still air. From the corner of his eye, he saw them. 4 lions emerging from the bush like golden shadows. The pride's leader, a massive male with a scar across his left eye, locked eyes with him. Ethan's heart raced. He knew this was the end. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of the lunging attack he expected, there was silence. He opened his eyes cautiously. The lions weren't stalking him. They were standing still, watching him with intense curiosity. The scarred male took slow, deliberate steps forward and stopped just a few feet away. Ethan could see it clearly now. There was no hunger in their eyes. No aggression, just something else. Recognition, compassion. The scarred lion circled him once, then did something utterly unimaginable. He laid down at Ethan's feet, his great head resting near the chains, as if standing guard. One by one, the others did the same, forming a protective circle around him. Ethan, trembling and overwhelmed, could only whisper through cracked lips, "Why? Why are you helping me?" But the lions said nothing. They simply stayed, watching, waiting. As the sun began to set and the cool winds rose over the plains, help finally arrived. Fellow rangers, having picked up Ethan's distress signal hours earlier, found him surrounded by the pride, untouched, unharmed, and very much alive. And as they approached, the scarred lion stood tall, looked at Ethan one last time, and led his pride back into the wild. That night, as Ethan sat in the safety of the ranger station, he couldn't shake the feeling that those lions had somehow known that he wasn't their enemy, but their protector. And in that moment of despair, when nature should have turned against him, it chose mercy instead. Even after being rescued, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind replayed every second of that surreal encounter. Lying on the small cot in the ranger station, his wrists bandaged and his body aching, he stared at the tin roof above him, wondering, why didn't they attack? He wasn't a man prone to fantasy. Years of experience in the wild had hardened him against sentimental notions about nature. But what he experienced that day challenged everything he thought he knew about the laws of the wild. The next morning, driven by a restless need for answers, Ethan met with Dr. Lawazi Tembo, a local wildlife behaviorist known for his deep understanding of lion prides. Ethan recounted every detail: the poachers, the chains, the unbearable heat, and finally, the lions. Dr. Tembo listened in silence, his dark eyes focused, his fingers tapping slowly against his notebook. When Ethan finished, the doctor leaned back and sighed. You said the lead male had a scar across his left eye? Yes, deep like an old wound. He looked wise and tired. Dr. Tembo stood and pulled out a faded binder filled with photos of known lion prides across the region. He flipped through until he stopped on one image. That lion, he said, tapping the photograph. We call him Mosi Oatunya, the smoke that thunders, named after the Great Falls. He's a legend around here. And if what you're telling me is true, you're not the first ranger he's spared. Ethan's eyes widened. Years ago, before he claimed his own pride, he was caught in a poacher's trap, Dr. Tembo explained. A young ranger risked his life to set him free. Since then, Mosi Oatunya has avoided human settlements, but he's never attacked a ranger. Some say he remembers, that he knows who his allies are. Ethan's throat tightened. Could this really be the same lion? Could he have recognized the uniform, the smell of the man who had once saved him, or at least the symbol of those who protect, rather than harm? Driven by a mix of awe and unfinished purpose, Ethan made a bold decision. I have to find him, he said. I have to see him again. Not by force, but on his terms. And so began a new journey, one not of survival, but of understanding. Ethan packed lightly, carrying only his camera and a single canteen of water. He wasn't there to trap or tag. He was there to witness. For days he tracked the pride, moving silently through the bush, sleeping under the stars, following the fading echoes of distant roars. And then, at sunrise on the 5th day, standing at the edge of a vast clearing, Ethan saw him. Mosi Oatunya. The lion stood on a rise, his silhouette framed by the golden morning light. His pride lay peacefully nearby, the cubs tumbling playfully as the lionesses watched over them. But it was Mosi's eyes that found Ethan first. They held each other's gaze across the distance, predator and protector, equals in that moment. And without fear, without hesitation, Mosi approached. Slow, deliberate steps, a king meeting a man who had finally understood his place. Ethan felt his pulse quicken as the lion stopped just a few feet away. Then, as if acknowledging a silent bond, Mosi lowered his great head, gave a slow, regal nod, and turned back toward his pride. In that brief encounter, no words were spoken, but something far more powerful had been exchanged. And as Mosi disappeared into the wild, Ethan knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Ethan had faced many dangers in his career, but nothing haunted him like the memory of those piercing eyes. Mosi Oatunya's eyes. Days after their last encounter, he felt something unfinished, as if the wild itself had left a door open, waiting for him to walk through. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of deep purple and gold, Ethan sat by the campfire, staring into the flames. His thoughts kept circling back to that moment under the fever tree, the way Mosi had stood between life and death, and instead of following nature's most brutal laws, he had chosen mercy. That wasn't instinct. That was something deeper. Driven by a restless pull he couldn't explain, Ethan decided to track the pride once more. Not for research, not for Lempity patrols, but to understand. He packed only what he needed: his camera, a water flask, and a notebook where he had begun writing down every remarkable moment of this unlikely bond. This time, he would go farther than before. deep into the territory few dared to cross. The days that followed were some of the hardest of his life, scorching heat by day, freezing winds by night. His boots cracked from the dry earth, his hands blistered from climbing rugged cliffs and pushing through thorned brush. But just when he thought he'd lost their trail forever, a single paw print appeared in the dust. Massive, unmistakable. That night, as the storm broke overhead and rain poured onto the dry savanna for the first time in weeks, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of a cliff, known locally as the Lion's Watch. Below him, under the protective cover of ancient baobab trees, he saw them. Mosio Atunya and his pride. But something was wrong. Mosi wasn't standing tall and regal like before. He lay on his side, his breathing shallow, his mighty chest rising and falling in slow, painful movements. The rain washed over his battered body, highlighting fresh wounds. A terrible realization struck Ethan. The old king had been in another brutal fight. His body bore the price of a lifetime defending his pride. Despite the danger, Ethan couldn't stay away. He descended quietly toward the pride, his every step cautious. The lionesses noticed him first, rising to their feet, their muscles tense. But Mosey lifted his head weakly and let out a low, rumbling growl, not of warning, but of acceptance. Ethan froze just a few meters away. In that rain-soaked silence, their eyes met again. And for the first time, Ethan saw it clearly. Not the fearsome king of the wild, but a tired warrior, a father, a guardian at the end of his journey. Slowly, Mosey pressed his head into the mud and released a long, weary breath. Ethan knew what this meant. The king's time was ending, and yet, despite his pain, Mosey remained surrounded by his family. Cubs nuzzling close, lionesses watching the horizon. Through the pounding rain, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking, "I'm here, old friend. You won't face this alone." That night, Ethan remained by the pride's edge, sitting through the storm, refusing to leave the lion who had once spared his life. And somewhere, amidst the thunder and lightning, something unspoken passed between man and beast. Respect, loyalty, and the quiet acceptance that all journeys, no matter how great, must one day find their end. The storm had passed, but the weight in Ethan's chest only grew heavier. Dawn broke slowly over the savanna, the wet earth steaming under the first rays of sunlight. Mosio Atunya still lay motionless, his mighty chest barely rising. His once magnificent mane was matted with mud and blood, his breath shallow and strained. Ethan knew time was running out, but as he prepared to return to the reserve for medical supplies, a sudden movement caught his eye. From the northern ridge, a rival lion appeared, a younger, stronger male with a thick, dark mane. His eyes locked onto the vulnerable pride below. The inevitable was happening. In the wild, no king ruled forever. And when a leader grew weak, challengers came to claim what was his: territory, pride, and even the lives of his cubs. The young male let out a bone-shaking roar that echoed through the valley, a brutal announcement of his arrival. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew the rules of the wild, the brutal traditions. If the rival male succeeded, he wouldn't just take over the pride. He would kill Mosey's cubs to ensure his own bloodline. The lionesses immediately formed a protective circle around their young, hissing and growling, their eyes wild with fear and defiance. Mosey, weak and struggling, tried to rise, but his legs gave out beneath him. "No, you can't let this end like this," Ethan muttered, his fists clenched helplessly. He knew he couldn't physically interfere. Doing so could lead to disaster for both the pride and himself. But something had to be done. In a moment of desperation, Ethan remembered something Dr. Tembo once told him. Lions respect symbols of dominance, a presence, a sound. Even a challenge, when delivered the right way, can turn the tide. With his heart pounding out of his chest, Ethan stood tall on the ridge, directly in the challenger's line of sight. He lifted his arms wide and let out a deep, guttural shout, loud, fierce, filled with every ounce of courage he had left. The rival lion paused, his attention drawn to the strange, defiant figure standing boldly above him. Ethan continued, slamming a metal flask against a rock to create sharp, echoing sounds, his voice unwavering. He wasn't a lion, but for that moment, he became the symbol of one. And against all odds, it worked. The young lion hesitated, his ears twitching, his instincts battling uncertainty. With a final snarl, he turned away and disappeared into the tall grasses, leaving the pride untouched. For now. Ethan collapsed to his knees, breathless, his entire body trembling. He turned toward Mosio-Atunya. The old king had seen everything. And despite the pain, despite the weakness, the great lion lifted his head and looked directly at Ethan. In that glance was everything: gratitude, pride, and the final acceptance of his own fate. Ethan crawled to his side, his hand trembling as he gently pressed it against Mosi's great paw. You protected them all your life, and in the end, I protected them for you, he whispered through tears. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, Ethan stayed there, sitting beside the lion who had once spared him and who had now entrusted him with his final legacy. But the question still lingered in the air like the scent of rain on the wind. Would this fragile peace hold? And could Mosi's bloodline survive the coming storms? The sun burned high above the plains, yet, despite the oppressive heat, Ethan remained at Mosi-Oatunya's side. Hours turned into a full day, and the old king's breathing grew more labored. Ethan could feel the end approaching, and though every instinct told him to accept the inevitable, something in his heart refused to let go. Just as the light began to fade, a soft rustle came from behind. Ethan turned quickly, his hand reaching instinctively for the small survival knife at his side. But it wasn't a threat. It was Dr. Lawazi Tembo, accompanied by 2 members of the wildlife rescue team. Word had spread of Ethan's journey deep into the wild, and when he hadn't returned, Dr. Tembo had followed the trail himself. As the doctor approached, his eyes widened at the sight of the dying king, and the pride gathered protectively around him. You found him, Dr. Tembo said softly, kneeling beside Ethan. And you stayed with him through all of this. Ethan nodded, unable to find his voice. Dr. Tembo examined Mosi carefully, his experienced hands moving gently over the lion's weakened frame. Then he did something unexpected. He leaned in and examined the cubs playing quietly near the lionesses. A slow, knowing smile appeared on his face. Ethan, do you know what you're looking at? Ethan shook his head, confused. These cubs, they aren't ordinary. They're Mosi's final legacy. But look at their coats. See the lighter shades, the unique markings? These are not just any cubs. They're direct descendants of one of the rarest genetic lines in Africa. If they survive, they could carry on a bloodline thought to be nearly extinct. Ethan's heart pounded. So, you're saying, I'm saying, Dr. Tembo interrupted gently, that these cubs represent the future of this species, and the fact that Mosi brought you into their world, it's no accident. He chose you, Ethan. He knew you would fight for them. At that moment, as if understanding every word, Mosi-Oatunnya lifted his heavy head and looked one last time at his pride. His eyes moved to his cubs, then to Ethan, and with a final, slow breath, the great lion let his head fall gently onto the earth. The king's journey had ended. The lionesses raised their heads in unison, letting out soft, mournful calls that echoed gently across the plains. Even the cubs seemed to understand the weight of the moment, curling up quietly beside their fallen father. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but this time there was no fear, no despair. Only a deep, unwavering sense of purpose. He stood and turned to Dr. Tembo. We can't let his story end here. These cubs, they need to survive. They need to live free. Dr. Tembo placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. and they will, but not without a fight. As the sky turned dark and the stars stretched endlessly above them, Ethan made a silent vow. The king was gone, but his legacy would rise again. The days following Mosio Atunya's passing were a whirlwind of preparation and urgency. Ethan and Dr. Tembo worked tirelessly, coordinating with wildlife conservation units and international preservation organizations. Protecting the cubs wasn't just about ensuring their survival, it was about securing the future of an entire bloodline that balanced on the edge of extinction. But with every passing hour, the threat of the rival male loomed closer. Word had spread among the rangers that he had been seen circling the area again, waiting for the moment to claim what nature told him was his. Time was running out. On a mist-covered morning, as the sun struggled to rise over the endless savanna, the plan was set into motion. The lionesses, sensing the tension, gathered their cubs in the tall grasses as the rangers moved carefully through the area. A protected relocation zone, vast, wild, and free from the reach of rival predators, had been prepared. The cubs would be moved there, far enough to ensure their safety, but close enough to one day return to their ancestral lands. Ethan knew this might be his final moment with them. He knelt before the young cubs, their pale, uniquely marked coats a living testament to their father's rare lineage. One brave cub, the strongest of the litter, stepped forward. His eyes held the same fire Ethan had seen in Mosio Atunya, the strength of a future king. Ethan reached out, his hand trembling as he gently rested it on the cub's head. "Live free, little warrior," he whispered. "Make your father proud." With a final, lingering glance, the lionesses guided their cubs toward the transport vehicles. There were no cages, only open transport platforms designed to minimize fear and stress. As the convoy rolled out across the plains, a familiar roar echoed one last time across the valley. Ethan turned toward the horizon, his heart clenching. And there, standing on the distant ridge where kings watched over their kingdoms, was the rival male. But this time, he didn't advance. He stood tall, watching as the cubs left the only home they had ever known. And in that moment, the old laws of the wild seemed to pause, if only for a heartbeat. The king was gone, his legacy had been protected, and the future of his bloodline now rested on the courage of those who chose to fight for life instead of taking it. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Ethan stood alone on the open plains, a quiet peace settling over him. He knew he had kept his promise, and somewhere out there under the same sky, Mosio Atunya's spirit lived on. In every breath his cubs took, in every roar that would one day echo across the land. If this story touched your heart, remember, true greatness isn't measured by power or dominance, but by the courage to protect what matters most. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes that compassion and courage can change the world. Together, let's keep these legacies alive.